Read with me. This comes from Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass. She's an indigenous PhD in botany. The federal government's Indian removal policies wrenched many native peoples from our homelands. It separated us from our traditional knowledge and life ways. The bones of our ancestors are sustaining plants. But even this did not extinguish identity. So, the government tried a new tool, separating children from their families and cultures, sending them far away to school, long enough, they hoped, to make them forget who they were. If you read the rest of this book, which I highly recommend, she'll give you more information about Carlisle and about the American tendency to separate the families of non-white cultures as a way to erase them from existence. If we look at these footnotes, you will see several names written down. Dorothy Roberts, Fatal Invention, taught me about the slow motion eugenics of contemporary medical apartheid. Shout out to Harriet Washington, who has a book about this as well. Lulu Miller wrote about how the history of eugenics is baked into American history in an uncomfortable way. Many of our scientific institutions have eugenicist founders, and those principles permeate those practices. Resmaa Menakem, I'll save to the end. Next is Hannah Jones, the creator of the 1619 Project, though incidentally, if you read the table of contents, Dorothy Roberts is the second chapter, the same author of Fatal Invention, talking about the cultural, genetic, and bodily erasure of communities of color throughout the history of the United States. Second to last, Walter Johnson, The Broken Heart of America. This book is harder to read, but it tells the history of how, beyond breaking apart indigenous families on the reservation, American history is also littered with examples of breaking apart enslaved families, continuing all the way now to our modern carceral state, where we break apart black families either via mass incarceration or via police violence and intimidation. My air conditioning is on. Fuck. But the real reason that I'm making this video is because of a concept called repetition compulsion. Now, I'm not a psychologist, so this is meant to be a teaching tool and not psychology advice or medical advice or anything like that. But the idea behind repetition compulsion is that until a trauma is worked through, we find unconscious ways to repeat it. We have been separating families since the indigenous genocide that founded this country. We continue to separate families in the systematic profiteering from human bodies known as the slave trade. So it should be no surprise to us that our gut reaction to brown folks crossing the border is to separate families until we resolve this trauma, until we have our truth and our reconciliation and our era, as Brian Stevenson says, of truth-telling and healing. We will continue to do this. If hurt people, hurt cultures, erase cultures. Read any of these books. It'll change your heart. Happy reading.